Lawmakers are expected to vote sometime this week on the Green New Deal.
The new resolution was introduced by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey. The plan has received a lot of buzz and criticism on both sides of the aisle. Here to talk more about and to address some of the criticism is AOC advisor Robert Hockett. He joins us now via Skype. Hockett is the Edward Cornell Professor of Law and Professor of Public Policy at Cornell University. Professor, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, so can we just clear this up before we get into some of the details of the Green New Deal? There was some controversy about whether or not there was this frequently asked question sheet distributed by AOC's office. You had this exchange on Fox, just so our viewers are up to speed.
Why would we ever pay people who are, quote, unwilling to work?
We never would, right? And AOC has never said anything like that, right? I think you're referring to some sort of a document that some doctored document that somebody other than us has been circulating.
Oh, I thought that came right from her. That was in the background or from her office, is my understanding.
No. She's actually tweeted it out to laugh at it. If you look at her latest tweets, it seems that apparently some Republicans have put it out there. I don't know the details.
Good.
Robert, there was a frequently asked question sheet distributed from her office, which has since either been rescinded or changed. Is that not correct? And is there anything in there that is still part of the Green New Deal that we should be discussing, or is all of it now retracted?
Well, so it turned out when I was interviewing with Mr. Carlson, we didn't know, or at least I didn't know about that document yet, the FAQ document. I've been doing media all day, and I had just received a text right before the program with the tweet that the Congresswoman had sent out referring to a doctored document. So when Mr. Carlson referred to something other than the resolution itself, I assumed he was talking about that thing that the office had just texted to me about an hour before. It turned out, of course, later, I guess early Saturday morning, I learned that there was a sort of early draft FAQ document that had been inadvertently sent out. So I phoned Fox, left them a couple of voicemails apologizing for the mix-up, and sent them an email as well apologizing for the mix-up. It is nevertheless the case that the document to which Mr. Carlson was referring is not the Green New Deal resolution and was actually not supposed to have been sent out. As you might know, some 90 House members have signed on, and about 12 senators. And so when you're trying to get that many people to sign on to one resolution, a lot of draft documents circulate back and forth, right, between different offices. So apparently the FAQ draft that got sent out inadvertently at some point was left over from some of those exchanges. And as soon as the Congresswoman's office found out about that, of course, they took it down and replaced it with the correct document. In any event, the resolution is really the key. That's the thing to kind of stick to, because that's what all of the various Congress members have signed on to. And that's ultimately what the Congresswoman has signed on to as well.
So, Robert, the biggest sort of knock on the Green New Deal is that it's not realistic. What is your response to that?
I think it's quite the contrary. I think this is a circumstance where bigger actually is more realistic for a number of reasons. For one thing, we've tried sort of piecemeal climate saving reform and climate legislation for quite a while. And it's very difficult to sort of galvanize a broad swathe of the public behind some sort of smallish, piecemeal kind of lowballing or slow walking sort of proposal. What's needed now, quite urgently, is a national mobilization, since we only have 10 to 12 years before we reach a tipping point. And as it happens, that kind of mobilization is usually what's required to get real action in any event. So we actually think bigger is actually more politically feasible. It's also more economically feasible for a very simple reason, and that is that if we're completely revamping our national infrastructure and manufacturing base and modernizing it with the most modern technologies, we're going to be improving the productivity of the economy as well, producing much more in the way of goods and services. And what that means is that there's much more to absorb the additional money that's spent, meaning that there will not be any substantial inflationary impact, or at least there's less likely to be any substantial inflationary impact in the case of a big program than in a small. That, of course, rings counterintuitive at first, but the key point here is that remember that inflation is a relation. It's the relation between the quantity of money and the quantity of goods. So if you're making investments that really do produce a lot more, ironically enough, you're likely to be acting much less inflationarily, if I could put it that way.
One of the major components of the actual Green New Deal document has to do with switching to net zero emissions, right? So it's not that there would be no emissions of any kind, it's that there would be trade-offs with the emissions that we have from really all economic activity. In terms of just electricity generation, that's an area where right now renewables are not as efficient as what you can get via the different fossil fuel pipelines that already exist, the different ways we have. So would people just be expected to pay a lot more for their electricity, businesses, homes, individuals? Is that just the cost of doing business for the Green New Deal?
We don't think so, because we think that the reason that the renewable sources are more expensive now is that we haven't scaled up, right? So it's a classic, it's a kind of universal truth, you might almost say, that basically when you're talking about matters of infrastructure that are sort of economy-wide, that sort of embrace the entire economy, basically the per unit cost of any new technology shrinks or drops very rapidly once you actually scale up, right? Because there are certain fixed costs that you incur irrespective of size, and that means that the average cost per unit tends to be smaller, or tends to be higher when the scale of what you're doing is smaller or lower. So we actually think that what we're going to be doing is making renewable energy much more inexpensive on a per unit basis, precisely in virtue of the fact that we're doing a sort of major mobilization. And this is another respect in which you could say the scale, the larger scale, is what paradoxically makes things actually more affordable.
So the Sunrise Movement has really been leading the charge for the Green New Deal, and it's comprised of young people, a group of them from, I think, age 7 up to age 16, somewhere in there, went to Dianne Feinstein's office, senator from California, and had a rather contentious exchange. Let's take a look at a little bit of that.
Government is supposed to be for the people and by the people and all for the people.
You know what's interesting about this group is I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway. I don't respond to that.
We're the people who voted you. You're supposed to listen to us. That's your
How old are you?
job.
How old
I'm
are you?
16. I
Well,
can't
you didn't vote for me.
Well, I'm voted.
It doesn't matter. We're the ones who's going to be impacted.
Well, you know better than I do. So I think one day you should run for the Senate.
Great.
And then you
She gets better every time, Crystal.
What did you make of this exchange, Robert?
Well, it's so sad, and at the same time so sort of familiarly ironic, right? So this is a real milestone year right now. If I'm correct, if I remember correctly, this is the year that millennials officially become the largest demographic in the country. They've got many more years ahead of them than do some of us old timers, especially somebody like Senator Feinstein. And I think for that very reason, right, they have a much greater sense of urgency on the one hand, because they're going to have to live with the most profound effects of climate change in a way that, sort of old timers in the Congress are not going to have to. And secondly, of course, as you know, when we're younger, we tend to have much bigger ideas as to what's possible. We're more energetic, we're less tired when we're younger, and that means we tend to view many more things as feasible than elderly folk do. And that's, I think, also reflected in this exchange. These kids know that they're going to have to live with the consequences of not acting. And they also have a sense of energy and a sense of potency and a sense of sort of can-do spirit that is also associated with youth. And so when a kind of an old timer in the Congress sort of poo-poos them or dismisses them, and even is so cynical as to say, well, you can't vote for me anyway, so I don't care. It's, again, in a certain sense, unsurprising, and yet in another sense, very, very sad.
I mean, Robert, we're talking about people, though, in this case, who are 12 or 13 years old. If you look at that video, do we really think that they know anything or have anything to add to how we're going to save the world from CO2 emissions?
I don't think we should underestimate them, right? Oftentimes, young kids will be much more knowledgeable than we realize and than we know. And furthermore, they have a much stronger sense of the urgency of the problem. And of course, as you know, right, the widely shared, almost unanimous consensus among climate scientists is that this really is an urgent problem. So the kids don't even have to be experts on the climate. All they have to know is that, well, if the overwhelming weight of scientific opinion is to the effect that we've only got 10 to 12 years to go, then I think that's kind of all they need to know. And at that point, what really matters most is the sense of urgency and the sense of potency. And they have both of those things. And again, I don't think some elderly legislators have that sense of potency or urgency. I don't want to sort of paint with too broad a brush. There are obviously legislators who are up in years. Senator Sanders, of course, is a case in point, who have the same sense of urgency and potency as any 12-year-old might have. But as a general rule, as a general matter, it's not that surprising that people who are sort of, early baby boomers might have a little bit less sense of urgency and potency than people who are millennials or younger.
Robert, do you have a sense of what will be next from AOC in terms of policy push that she's going to put on the table? I mean, it has been remarkable. Now, every 2020 contender has to say, are they for or against the Green New Deal? She really made that happen as a freshman member of Congress. No matter what you think of her, that has been an incredible thing to behold. What is going to be her next major push?
So precisely what's next is not something that we know yet, but I can give you some sort of broad, I can give you kind of a broad overview as to sort of what the next steps are likely to look like. So the key point here to emphasize first is that we're quite literal about this. We really want there to be Green New Deal projects in every congressional district of the country. That was one of the secrets to the success of the original New Deal. There were projects in every congressional district. Now that is both politically savvy, of course, it's a way of getting a lot of support, but even apart from that and instrumental reasons or considerations of that sort, it's just democratic, right? That's what justice would require. The Green Deal is meant to be for everybody, and so of course there will be projects for everybody in every district. Now given that, it seems to me that what's most likely to happen is that the first particular proposals or statutes that we draft and propose are likely to be broadly bipartisan in the sense that they themselves target multiple districts, including Republican districts. That was another thing about the original New Deal. People sort of either never do this or maybe they forget it, but the New Deal wasn't one big statute like Obamacare or Dodd-Frank. The New Deal was a multiplicity of statutes, a sequence that unfolded over the course of a decade, and there was a sort of grand national deliberation, a kind of participatory democratic process pursuant to which various things were tried and things that failed were discarded, things that worked were then scaled up. And again, it was done in every district of the country. We plan on acting the same way when it comes to the Green New Deal. And so again, what that suggests to me is that the first things that we do, the first discrete steps that are particular and specific, are probably going to be steps that really do target all districts so that we have maximal support and maximal benefit for that matter.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us, Professor.
Come back and see us again. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Crystal, and thanks, Buck. See you soon, I hope.
Dianne Feinstein gets into a verbal sparring match over the Green New Deal. Her sparring partners will surprise you. They were kind of small. Justin Fairfax makes some off-putting historical comparisons about sexual allegations against himself. Should he resign?
Yes, he should. American financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and former U.S. Attorney, now Labor Secretary Alexandria Ocasio, and a plea deal that may have been made in the shadows. Should Ocasio resign as well? Team Rising is here to talk about all of that. Stay tuned for more Rising.